Hi, and welcome everyone to this webinar on admin adventures, a deep dive into Zero Trust. I'm Ulrik Rysgaard, and I'm the Nordic Region Executive and a Senior Strategic Security Advisor here at Carla Tokens. I'll be your host for this session, and joining me today on the panel is a renowned speaker, Paula Januszkiewicz. And Paula is a security expert and the founder and the CEO of Secure, an IT cybersecurity consulting company that conducts IT security audits and penetration testing and what have we. Very clever people.
Hello. Thank you so much, Ulrich, for the invitation. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Paula. I can say, Paula, I can add to this. You are you're very clever, special person for us here. You are cloud and data center management Microsoft MVP. You are an external honorable Microsoft regional director, working as an external partner and a very popular speaker at global conferencing. Including both Black Hat I've seen and RSA and Black Hat Asia briefings not so long ago. And so I feel very both humble and in a very good company today. So a warm welcome to you, Paula.
Thank you, absolutely. It will be great to talk more about the Zero Trust and also to give the insight happening currently in the industry. So looking forward to it.
Thanks. Me too. So today we are going to have a closer look at the limitations with today's security postures and definitely see some action, and also have a closer look at the Zero Trust architecture model, the one based on the NIST special publication 800-207 that has become highly relevant, I would say. But Paula, what is your view and experience with these limitations we see in today's security models? Should we assume breach?
Absolutely. So currently, when we take into consideration amount of attacks that is happening, and when we look, for example, even into the FBI report that has been summarizing the pandemic, we can see that the amount of attacks has increased by 300%, which is quite a lot. But we've got the same amount of companies, same components of the infrastructure. So in general, what we should take into consideration every single time we operate in the infrastructure is that hackers are there, and that's why we need to make sure that they cannot escalate further, even though they manage to get our identity.
Thanks. So can you elaborate even more on the limitations you see? Let's take a deep dive into some of those limitations that you experience in the spirit of Zero Trust and so that assuming breach, so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now we are living in the world when not only, of course, Zero Trust should be our mindset, and it will be great, of course, to define first what the Zero Trust is, but overall, when we are thinking about also various statistics that are currently there, we can see that 17% of breaches involved some kind of form of malware, and that is actually coming from the Verizon 2020 Data Breach Investigations report. That also shows us that within the infrastructures, for example, when the attackers are, let's say, trying to get access through phishing, then there is some kind of a code that executes, and that code, for example, executes in the context of the user. But the problem is that user has access to data. Sometimes user is a little bit too privileged. So how can we be sure that whenever we are accessing a certain part of the infrastructure, so let's say there is an admin trying to log into the servers and so on, that hackers basically are not sitting there? And that is also beautifully demonstrated during pen tests, and that's something that within our team we do. I do pen tests pretty much on an everyday basis, and we're able to see that currently identity, for example, and the way how identity is managed in organizations on average in general, it's not managed according to the good practices. Not to mention, of course, multi-factor authentication, but also in the way how we monitor identity. So for example, do we know who and when executes certain code in general in our infrastructure, on our servers, and so on. And in vast majority of cases for the companies, answer is we don't know. That's why the approach with assuming the bridge, it's a very good approach, which allows us to take measures in order to move into the direction of zero trust, but also the privilege access management. So that is what we see. Also, what is interesting over there is that 22% of breaches they featured phishing or social engineering, which is also a very interesting perspective, especially taking into consideration companies like Colonial Pipeline and so on, or eventually SolarWinds, where these companies were affected by a simple attack. We couldn't even call it attack because it's like attack, when we say it, we imagine something big. And for these companies, theoretically well managed from the cybersecurity perspective, we were dealing with just simple password for the user that wasn't managed, and hackers managed to get that password or simply guess this password, and they managed to get access to the infrastructure. So when we are working in environments that are so big, there are many points of entry. Of course, we have to have them under control, and that is well-designed, well-managed cybersecurity in the organization, but still for lots of companies that isn't the case.
I think these are very good examples, and I think as we must assume breach and get used to and embrace as attackers could be on the inside, I think it also needs we need to move our focus in the spirit of zero trust to protect the areas that is most valuable for us, and not just stay finding most vulnerabilities or where there are most holes. It's moving the focus. I think that's very much in the spirit of zero trust, moving our focus towards what is most valuable for us. Would you say so?
Absolutely. So one thing is this, and the second thing is that we've got also the concept of a shadow IT. So these are projects conducted out of compliance with out of compliance with like official company policies, and eventually without oversight from the company's corporate IT function. And in general, the infrastructure is always alive, yeah, if we could describe it this way. So there are different solutions popping up, there are new projects going on, there are new releases being, for example, published for the beta testing and so on. So that is what we are dealing with every day, and zero trust in general helps to secure our organizations. As we assume the breach, we introduce the principle of least privilege just to make sure that we are making life more difficult for the attackers, and eventually this is also the way how we are able to prevent the lateral movement, and we're just simply also making it more difficult to perform. So in general, the zero trust concept altogether used with the idea of the assuming the breach, it's related with minimizing the impact of the hacker, because we cannot also assume that everything's going to be perfect here. Yes, so that's why we are assuming the breach. So we are minimizing the impact of the hacker, and at the same time we are making sure that hacker is stopped at the certain system, certain solution, and so on. Plus we add monitoring on the top of that. So the moment where we log in, for example, to the server, like question is, how do we log in? Do we log in as a domain admin? Obviously bad idea. As a privileged admin, yeah, so then okay, maybe that is the way to do it. But at the same time, if that privileged admin's credentials or in general identity is getting stolen, then it would be great to monitor, prevent the lateral movement across the servers with this identity. So this is kind of like the direction that we need to move in right now.
I absolutely agree. And so while we conclude that there are all these limitations and the current models is not sufficient and we need to move our focus, questions arise like, what should we do then? And what does this mean? Maybe this is a good cue to dive a little bit more into, what is it that we should do instead, right? So let me try to take and share a little bit about that. So while we now have concluded that there certainly it's not impossible for imposters to make breaches, and we see that over and over again, and we can see that over and over again the zero trust principle or the terminology is being used. So what does it really mean? And I would also say it would be fair to say there's been a lot of confusion in the market referring to zero trust, what it really is. And I think that's why we have taken this route to really share how this has been standardized to clear up the confusion, and let's have a look at what that means. So that is we have got so much more clarity on the zero trust model now that the National Institute of Standard Technology, also known as NIST, as we know them, has produced a very strong, powerful, and actually simple document, the special publication 800-207, and I think it's worth spending a little bit time on that to really understand what is the better model and how we can work practically with that. So let me try to summarize, how we've been working with that for quite some time, also since it was in draft in 2019, but finally released here in August 2020. And I certainly think it deserves more attention to how we can use this as a very effective, but also quite simple zero trust architecture framework. Let me make a few points. By the way, I think it has been a conclusion that the adoption has been too slow. We clearly have seen that also from the current president, Joe Biden, that made an issued this executive order May 12th. That was not something I've seen before, clearly stating that among others that within 60 days then all agencies should develop a plan for implementing the zero trust architecture. Now that this model exists and we know that this model is superior, then I can understand why they trying to accelerate the adoption of this, and they're referring, as we can see here, to NIST. So what does this mean? And let's allow me to try to decompose that a little bit so we can work practically with these things. But it's really back to that the new approach, it's like a new approach to risk assessment. Instead of only looking at all the vulnerabilities and holes that we need to embrace because they will be there, then we don't trust that. So we move our focus, as said, to the most valuable assets. So let's have a look at what that means according to NIST when we explain it from the special publication. There are 3 simple sections I think that is worth taking out of this. There's a very good key definition. What is the core of working with the zero trust architecture, about the key mechanism preventing unauthorized access to these resources, especially what we also is known as these crown jewels, the most valuable things for us. And there are some key points on how you can evaluate technology, especially pointing to the focus of obtaining granularity of these enforcement policies. But to understand it further, they also talk about 3 main approaches, and I think they're quite interesting because they are the key to cleaning up some of that confusion. While some say if we have a identity, we need better identity management solutions to obtain zero trust. Why are there then people saying that it's something else? And there's a good example of that I'll be showing in a minute. And there are the 7 basic tenets, of course, these sub-principles that really also are very simple to stick to, and it's a very good checklist. And maybe even more essentially, NIST also explained the implementation steps. We've been working with that from quite a lot of implementations, are sharing a little bit of that. So let's see that, how that looks, just to get into the layers of this. So in section 3.1, and I can absolutely encourage everyone to just Google or Bing or whatever we are using to search for NIST 800-207, and it would probably be a top hit for a simple download of this free document. Is available for every one of us to use, some 50 pages, but as I said, there are some good main sections that we can take out here and take with us to really understand how we clear up the confusion about what the zero trust model is and work with that as a formal model. And the first thing here in section 3.1 is an emphasis on the resources, what we need to access. It makes sense in a short while when we can see what other approaches there are. But the first approach in this stack, you can say, to what NIST says, comprises a full zero trust solution where you need to include all three approaches that we will show here to make up the full zero trust solution. Then the first is to focus on the resource, and that approach they also call identity-based microsegmentation, whatever that means. I don't maybe think that is the best term, but also Gartner uses it a lot and becomes this synonym for having that technology mechanism that can really also serve as what NIST calls the policy enforcement point, having that technology mechanism with the granularity that is so fine that you can single out a single high value resource. It could be application workload, it could be high sensitive data file that you want to protect as a resource and can control the access to this. So that is one thing that they say that needs to be a driver of policies for the resource. Then they say that you combine that with having focus on the requester, what they call the subject, which also makes a lot of sense, moving the focus back to where the request is starting and who wants the access. And here they explain how security identity services, things like multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and what is associated with this really becomes key to make also policies around the requester to make sure that we can evaluate the trust in the requester before getting access or allowing access to the resource. So that becomes also very important, and we see many different identity services. One that we have used in many implementations here in the north part of Europe is Microsoft's identity services, also as many organizations use today with their Active Directory moving to the cloud with the Azure Active Directory. And if you can plug into that and use that, that's a good example. But there are also other identity providers. So the third to comprise the full stack is then the focus on what is also known as a CTNA, the Zero Trust Network Access Method, where you have an emphasis on the policies on that connection for the user. It could be, for example, how to fix or improve the security for the remote users. Instead of just using a flat VPN technology that is really not known today as aligning very well with the zero trust principles, because the granularity is normally very poor, providing too wide access. So instead, they are introducing, like a Gartner is promoting a lot the CTNA method, or what NIST also just in a high-level definition called the approach about software-defined parameters to drive these policies. And we need to really to combine all three. And I think that's why it makes so much sense to look at this, so we can understand why people have different opinions or speaking about zero trust in different ways. And here we can see it all makes sense, because we need to comprise it of all what is called all three approaches. Yes. So does that also resonate with you, Paula? So I assume
Absolutely,
so.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I was clicking the button to turn on the microphone and not to disturb you when you were speaking. Yes, of course. So this is what we see also from our customers' perspective. This is in general from the need perspective also making so much sense. And regarding the vendor support and so on, in operating systems, so both for Linux and Windows, we do have a couple of monitoring mechanisms that would allow us to see what is happening. But in general, what is important is to have a better form of information delivered to us in order to evaluate not only what's going on, but also to prevent things. So yes, I agree with you, Ulrich.
Okay, thanks. So what we can also see that zero trust does not come like a product. It's important to understand that it's an architecture. It's also like a strategy that is implemented with the architecture as a plan, and with these principles that also comes with these 7 basic tenets. So on top of the kind of the core definitions and the 3 approaches, what is really helpful that is pointed out these basic tenets, these 7, that also demonstrates that it's a combination of tools, technology, but also procedures, like having an continuous improvement and testing of the security posture. Like I know that you are doing a lot, Paula, in Secure, where you are evaluating and testing the security posture all the time, and in such we need to keep improving on this, as it's stated in basic tenet 7. But also it says that we need to at all time keep monitoring and understand all assets that pops up in our infrastructure, and to understand what is really authorized devices and assets. Yes. So not dwelling too much into this, I'd like to move on and just have a few comments that as something that is dear and close to my heart is how we can work practically with this and have some guidance on the implementation, and because it's absolutely doable to implement zero trust end-to-end architecture, and working from these 7 basic tenets, the 3 approaches, making sure we do all this. And I like this model where the emphasis of and discovering all the assets, zooming in, and I think that's what I particularly like. This emphasis on taking an iterative approach. So it's really taking one crown jewel, one high value system at the time, and make sure that works. That becomes really like a no excuse for doing this, because every organization could do this and obtain this, what I would call a near military grade model and protection around a singular resource that is high value. And you do that, and you map all the access to this resource, and understand what is your baseline. You can review this, get it approved, what is acceptable access. You need to turn that into policies. In another session, we would very much like to demonstrate how we do this practically, so you don't drown in policies. Most would think, if you have a linear thinking about how you used to do that in a network environment, that would be simply too many policies doing that around every single resource. I can understand that, but there exist high-level languages to overcome this. And you do the integrations that will help you a lot. For example, the integration with the identity services. There are very strong, secure ways of doing that today. For example, the Azure AD Gallery App method is a very good example. The emphasis is then on the not making any business interruptions while you're doing that. And you are absolutely able to do this if you have a very good simulator, a verification tool, where before you enforce, you can verify that all the policy mechanism works. So it only allows access to the known acceptable. Everything else will be blocked. And in this way, I think it's very beautiful that we prevent anything that is unknown and is only allowing what is known good access. I like the simplicity in this model. So I think this kind of summarizes for now. I think it's time to see some action, Paula, and see some examples that explains why we need to assume breach and why it's absolutely possible to make a compromise. So over to you, Paula, and I'm excited to see what you have for us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ulrich. And let's get into a bit of demonstrations as well for, well, in general, seeing how the particular threats could look like, and also how eventually we are able to prevent them. So I am sharing the screen right now with the slide, of course, how the attacks happen. And over here, of course, this is a quite a generic list that allows us to see how, in general, attacks could be introduced to the organization. So one thing, of course, could be related with the social engineering and in general open source intelligence. So becoming familiar with what kind of services you've got available from the outside perspective. And for example, like various services where you are able to use a username and a password, for example, to log in, which of course multi-factor authentication sounds very beautiful, but not on every level through every solution it could be implemented easily. And yes, we get into the direction of the world not really using passwords, but we're not there yet. That's why we've got various authentication apps, we've got multi-factor authentication in general. But of course, if we even look at the popular services like LinkedIn and so on, we would expect that maybe we could have an additional way to authenticate by leveraging the authentication app, though not always on that scale is possible. So question is, of course, what can we do inside and what kind of solutions we can implement inside to assure that even though the breach is gonna happen, because it might happen on a completely different level, then we are not able to move further with that in the infrastructure. We've got, of course, cases like there is a software vulnerability. We've got the case of a various code that executes some malware. So it really depends what kind of situation we're going to be at within the attack in order to get into the further stages for the attack. And let me actually start with a very simple demonstration where we are able to see how the attacks, for example, could start. So over there on the right side, you guys can see that I've got the hacker's machine listening for the incoming connections, and over there is actually a user that gets a phishing email with, let's say, COVID statistics. Now again, from the IT perspective, that probably won't be the case, but that particular phishing could not only go through anti-phishing, anti-spam filters, but it could have more context because it's being sent, for example, by the colleague that is using maybe some personal account. So it could be our colleague from work, but this time sending an email from Gmail because I'm outside of the company and I'm using only my mobile device, or I'm in travel, whatever the excuse we're going to use. And then this person is going to say simply that, hey, you've got here an email. I thought that you might like it, or something like that. So in general, attacks nowadays are better prepared and they are context-based. Also, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report I was mentioning at the very beginning quotes one thing, is that 86% of attacks, that's crazy a lot, is actually financially motivated. So people just simply want money on the other side, meaning that they're gonna do everything they can in order, for example, to encrypt your data and ask for the ransom. And even though data is gonna be treated like this, of course, on the other side, we might be saying that, okay, but we got a really well-designed backup plan, or user only has access to data the user needs, and we are identifying the anomaly that that user, for example, is not supposed to log in or access that data this way. So this is the threat intelligence that we are getting to, and that's why it's so important to make sure that, of course, we got all these issues addressed, because they scale out really quickly. So for example, here, user's gonna enable content for the macro. Now this macro is pretty cool because underneath we've got the malicious code, of course, but that macro works in a way that these empty lookalike cells, they're not really empty cells. Empty cells are here. This part over there, so these lookalike empty cells, these are for real just one big picture. So it looks like there is a button, but no, the whole thing is a button. So I don't know how about you, but I'm actually, when I open Excel, I click on the empty cell because I just want to be in control for Excel. So that's why if you click anywhere and let's do that, then underneath there is a PowerShell running, and that's also quite interesting because that, of course, for vast majority of companies, if not like for pretty much all of the companies, PowerShell is allowed also for users. So it's important to know these anomalies that are allowing us to execute things. That's why, for example, when we do pen tests, then they just simply work. We simply manage to get access to places, to companies, because of these kind of misconfigurations that sometimes when we are working on daily basis in the environment, we just simply sometimes even ignore. Yeah. So over here, you were able to see that I'm that user. Yeah. Now, question is, what can I do next? And there's one rule that you guys need to know, that every single thing I'm actually executing as a user has access to users' data, users' credentials, and so on. And that is something that I would like to continue on, because this is how identity can be compromised within the organization. And that's why, of course, assuming the breach makes sense, because if you're going to use identity in an incorrect place or in general incorrectly, then these attacks can spread really fast. Okay, continuing on the demo. If, for example, hacker is already here acting as a user, hacker can execute applications in the name of that user. And let me move to this machine over here. So here I'm actually simulating this situation. I got a Freddy Krueger's workstation, and hacker will run, for example, a simple application which is Chrome Pass. Now please have a look. Chrome Pass, not being Chrome, not being Google Chrome browser, is capable of extracting passwords from the user's browser. Now, how could that be? Well, answer to this is actually quite simple. It could be this way because we are running this app as a user. So could it be that if I use 7-Zip or any other untrusted software, yeah, meaning you download something from the internet. It could be even portable apps, guys. So that could be something that is digitally signed. Maybe there is a problem with the development, yeah. And that's why we always have to assume that in order to make sure that we are limiting it properly. So you got some kind of a even might be the software that you pay for. Yeah. So Adobe in the past had a very loud case about that within their process of development, they were actually distributing malware to their customers. So that's why it's important to have software that's going to be monitoring activities of how we are using the identity. What is my point here is that Chrome Pass is not supposed to get passwords for Google Chrome because it's a different app. But in Windows, for example, it works in a way that if you run applications as yourself, all these applications, they have access to all these secrets, all these passwords. So potentially 7-Zip could have also access to passwords that you have stored in a Google Chrome. Now, taking that into consideration, what is important to know is that that password, of course, could be leveraged in various other ways, because not only that could be password for LinkedIn, but that could be the set of passwords for many repositories, many business apps within the organization, not to mention, of course, identity that's privileged. So that's one perspective here. Another perspective over there would be, and let's go to a bit of a techie part of the demonstration, would be that if, of course, we've got access to this data because we're running things as users, then we are able to extract passwords. Okay, but what about a bigger picture? And that's actually what's my favorite part over here, because not many companies manage, particularly the access, the privileged access to the certificate that is actually stored within the domain, which we call, by the way, the domain's private key. And if you are on a techie side, you might have not heard about it, because this is, by the way, something what our team has reverse engineered. We have reverse engineered data protection API. And as far as we know, we are the only and the first team in the world who fully reverse engineered DP API. And it took us over 2 years to do that. So what's the story here? The story is that what I actually did over here, I have used the CQLSA secret damper. That's actually our tool that we wrote, and it's free. You can download it if you want. And I exported from the ntds.dit on the domain level something that we call a private domain private key. So that's in this PFX. You are not able to find it in the certificates container. That's why, for example, when we let me launch it once again. When we, for example, open up that PFX, the first thing I have to do in order to show you how that certificate looks like, it's actually the import. And if we go, of course, to the Cert Manager MSC, as I had it already open, then basically we are able to see that that certificate that is used across the whole domain, it's just like not available. It's really strange. Issued to nobody, issued by nobody, yet valid only 1 year. So if you guys have a domain and basically you have not done anything special to it, of course you might have upgraded it and so on, rise functionality, yeah, these activities, they do not impact on that certificate. What is also important to know is that if you ever have been attacked and the hackers managed to get to the domain, there in our team, for example, we are dealing with attacks, and during the pandemics in a massive amount, helping customers to actually recover and also perform in general the incident response. And if you did the incident response, I can tell you one thing: there is a list of 40 steps, approximately 40 steps you are able to do in order to fix the problem. So, for example, reset passwords of the users, reset the password of Kirby TGT account, reset KDS root keys, and so on. So there's like 40 steps to do after the domain has been compromised. But one step cannot be made, and that's a big problem to have, is that you cannot reset that certificate. There's nothing you can do about it. If it leaks, it leaks. And of course, what is this certificate for? You might be wondering, because maybe that is actually not a problem. Well, that is actually a problem, because if this certificate leaks, then that certificate you can use to decrypt secrets, identity related, of all of the users at once in your domain. And that is what I want to show you. It's a big drama in some sense, because if hacker manages to get that certificate, and if the hacker is in the domain, then yes, pretty much 100%, then there's nothing you can do. So whatever you would do later, yeah, whatever you're going to implement later, it doesn't matter, because your domain will always remain at the compromised state. And this is how basically you cannot trust it. So that certificate, let me show you for what you can actually use it, yeah, so that we got a full context of the attack over there. So remember, this is basically the computer of the Freddy Krueger, of the user. So I'm going to minimize things so that you guys can focus fully on this one. And what I'm going to do, I will actually first of all demonstrate you the situation where this computer is attacked by the hacker, but hacker, it's not a user, it's some different account. It could be local system, yeah. And how I would like to demonstrate it, I'm gonna log in, to this workstation, but with the changed cache logon data of the user. So in order to be able to log in with the changed cache logon data of the user, to simulate that as that particular hacker account, we don't have access to our secrets. So to do it, I'll disconnect from the network, next, repair your computer, and then troubleshoot advanced options command prompt. So over there, I'm gonna demonstrate how we are able to change cache logon data, something that people call cache credentials, but we don't have such a thing like cache credentials, by the way, because we don't store credentials in the registry. We only store value that we compare with in order to log on. So let's change the cache logon data, LSA dump. This is our module within the Mimikatz Secure Edition, LSA dump cache. And then we're going to specify here Windows, system32 config, system, and then the Windows system32 config security / kiwi in order to change cache logon data. Why we're doing this? Well, simply we're doing this because we want to log in with different credentials so that these secrets that I was showing you before, they are actually dependent on the user's data, and then basically we will be able to move forward over there. Yeah, so this is the setup. Let me launch it quickly once again because I did connect to the other window over there, but that's going to be a quick thing over there. So let's say dump and then cache once again, and then basically we refer to the Windows system32 config system, which, by the way, adding on the top of that, this is the place where the boot key is, and config security, and this is where the cache logon data is / kiwi, enter, and this allows us to overwrite cache logon data. So now, being disconnected from the network, having that one overwritten, yeah, by the way, we could do it both online and offline. So for the fact that I did it offline, it doesn't matter. It's actually a little bit simpler to demonstrate it this way. We're going to be trying to get access to secrets of the user. Yeah, so we are demonstrating over here hacker trying to access user's profile. So let's try to use even the previous password. So that was password. I'm not able to do that. But what I did right now, I have overwritten the cache logon data of the user. So I'm logging on as a domain user with a different password, of course, with the cache logon data. So first of all, here identity is impacted because the non-repudiation is violated. That's one thing. But luckily, and that is what I wanted to show you, if we're gonna act on and get access to the computer this way, our identities that are stored in the browser, in Outlook, in various applications and so on, they are dependent on our credentials, on our actually username and the password hash, so the previous one. And because we have changed that illegally, we're not able to get access to the user's secrets unless we are that user. So summarizing, if hacker manages to be that user, take over the identity, run phishing on the user's account, and so on, then basically we're able to get access to this identity and then eventually escalate. But if hacker manages to get to this computer but not as this user, and the user is not logged in and so on, so we are not able to take over the identity, we're not able to get access to the user's secrets. But you wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be here if it was all perfect. Let me show you where is the huge problem. The huge problem is basically related with that certificate of the domain. If that leaks at some point, as I mentioned, we get a absolutely huge problem because with this certificate, we're able to decrypt every single user's password in a domain. So if you have home company, when there's 100,000 people working, then you can do it exactly to 100,000 people with just one certificate. That's why monitoring identity and having zero trust is such an important point here because how else in this context especially. Okay, let me get to the toolkit, and I'm explaining you the situation. First of all, we could see that at that point I was not able to extract password using Google, using the Chrome pass. Yeah, so the password was empty. We can even have it open. That's okay. So how this password over there is encrypted? Well, we already said it's with the previous password hash of the user, or, and that's for the case for the domain users, it is encrypted with the public key of the domain. Public key of the domain. So we can only get it when we get a private key. So if you go to their user's profile, update the roaming, Microsoft, protect, SID, these are all hidden and system files, so you have to display them. What we see over here, it's a list of master keys, as we call them, including the public, same for every single user key of the domain. And that list of master keys are encrypting and decrypting users' secrets. So passwords stored in Outlook, also encryption certificates, blah, blah, blah. So anything cryptography related, unless it's implemented by the application itself, but is relying on OS, it's actually protected by these keys over there. So what is also interesting is that if the master keys over there are encrypted with the user's password hash, which I don't have, and at the same time they are also encrypted, so there's a second copy in this file stored by the public key of the domain, by having private key I'm able to decrypt them, right? Exactly. So let's get into this point. But what is important to know is which of these keys I have to get access to in order to get access to the Google Chrome passwords. Which of those is responsible for Google Chrome? Well, I don't know, but I can check. CQ, DPAPI blob searcher, and I'm giving it a directory to get access to the Google Chrome profile folder, yeah? And that is simply C users, Freddy, and then another one is updata, local Google Chrome. Yes, it's probably somewhere there, but I don't know yet where. Now, second part is to do the recursive search, output to the CQ tools, and I'm streaming it out to dpapi.txt enter. And after a moment, approximately 20 seconds, I'm able to see that within the dpapi for the file over there, there's a list of entries mentioned where, in particularly Google Chrome, we are storing these secrets. So imagine running this tool on the top of the full operating system. 100% guys, you're gonna have something. Yeah, you're gonna have some secrets. Question is, are they meaningful for you? And is it like for you is this a lot, maybe for someone else it's less. So this is something that you need to evaluate. We can see that for Google Chrome it's B55 master key, and that B55 master key, yeah, represents Google Chrome, who underneath uses Schwawa and TripleDes. But B55 is something that we need, so we're going to go to the folder over there and search for the B55, and we found it. It's this guy. So shift right click and copy as path. What we're going to do next is we're going to run the CQ master key AD, where we're going to use the PFX, so the one from the DC, to decrypt that particular master key, and the new hash that we are running currently right now, so we logged in with the password Mimikatz, to encrypt it. But let me first generate that hash. So that is CQ hash calc Mimikatz and 1, and that is actually the hash that we're going to be using for the encryption of the master key to give us secret. So see, I am completely independent here from any user. Just because of the certificate, I'm able to access every user's secret, and let me prove that to you in a moment. So what we did, we have generated this AD modified master key. So I'm going to rename this guy, and I'm going to name it good or something. And this AD modified is like this. And for that file, I'm going to be also adding one more thing, which is an attribute, attrib with a system and hidden. Yeah, so these two, and then this particular password, when we refresh it, you're able to see that it's coming in the clear text. So this is massive. And the reason why it's like this is because hackers managed to get that particular certificate from the domain. Is this a common knowledge, by the way, to have? Absolutely not. But for you guys, it's important to see that as a risk, and also see that as an unfixable problem that can be only mitigated by, I would say, building a wall around it. So well-designed monitoring, implementing privileged access management, not trusting your infrastructure because that can escalate very quickly, and definitely not allowing that situation to happen in order to extract that private key. Because as I mentioned before, this is a situation that you cannot fix. So the only thing you can do about it is to limit the privileged access in your infrastructure. And that's why whenever we are thinking about the modern threats, modern attacks, and so on, this is something that we should take into consideration whenever, of course, we are designing our cybersecurity strategy. So, okay, one thing is identity to be protected and so on, but the second thing is to analyze where and what are your points of entry so that you can prevent the lateral movement in the infrastructure, so you will never get to this point. Because if the hacker would get to this point, it's too late, and this is more serious than just becoming a domain admin in the infrastructure, because this is like domain admin forever, or at least the access to the personal data forever. So summarizing, every employee in the organization, it's the first line of a defense, but at the same time, what kind of privileges they got, that's something to be analyzed. If we want to move forward and grow in cybersecurity, we have to revise our decisions that we took during the pandemic in order to implement the quick protections, and then think about the long-term strategy, what kind of future is going to be for the attacks, and eventually they're going to be focusing on executing the code that we don't know, stealing the identity in general is more important than ever. So that is something that we have to protect. Also, balancing security and usability to avoid a shadow IT scenario requires from us continuous review of the environment, but at the same time, zero trust to solutions that we implement. Because again, points of entries within the huge infrastructure, we've got simply a lot of those. So that is something that we can predict. And also the important thing, starting pretty much a long conversation here, is the cybersecurity skills gap, which is in every organization. We are a consulting company, and we also have a skills gap because it's hard to find someone good on cybersecurity. I try to build my team, and that's a long process. And long story short, that's why supporting ourselves with software that can provide us more context nowadays makes lots of sense. So thank you from my side, and Ulrich, of course, I'm giving the stage to you to summarize our meeting as well.
Thank you very much, and wow, Paula, amazing examples. I think it really showcases is why we can't trust what we normally trust, including how we use and manage privileges, for example. And congratulations to you and your team with that accomplishment as the first to work around the certificate services that you showed, and obtaining domain control and all that, being able to decrypt, identity objects. Very scary. So while this is clearly demonstrating that we need to assume breach, we really need to limit trust to limit risk. That's for sure. So just summarizing, as a theme here, assuming breach, with the examples you made, you clearly showed that how there's a risk, for example, and certain limitations in today's models, limitations in preventing launch of legitimate code, as you showed, and stop the lateral movement, then it's difficult, and all these things that you showed, leading us to protecting the crown jewels. And it made me think that mention that we have spoken about going even deeper here the next time, where we could show where the zero trust model really, how it applies in an attack. So just a little teaser to look for more events here with us where we would like to demonstrate how Zero Trust can be applied in an attack sequence, and also where we could go deeper into understanding the NIST different components to really being able to work with this and understand the terminology. It's not that much, but it's still good to understand the model and how everything comes together. For example, understanding the resource, the requester end, what is the policy enforcement point, the meaning of where it's located, why they are driving towards having the policy enforcement point as close to the resource as possible. What about the information feeds, how that goes into the policy decision point with the trust algorithm and so forth, how we work with all that. And also maybe some examples of how we work practically with this, with some design blueprints. Yes. So I guess that is summarizing this, and I can see it leaves us a little time for some questions, and we are now opening up the floor for questions and answers. And yeah, and I also if the questions that could be raised that we don't have time for, I think we will send them or announce them later. So, but just to start here with some questions, we can start with. Do you see Zero Trust becoming the default security architecture and making everything else redundant or irrelevant? And I would say both yes and no. Yes, absolutely. Zero Trust, I see that has the potential because it has the power of being truly transformational to security architectures. It's about, organizations care about how effective it is in terms of how much the cost is for protecting the value. And it has just proven itself to be highly effective at protecting and reducing risk more. You can never be completely sure, so it's about the risk reduction. And what I would say is, it's not making everything else redundant, but it should be a first. So it has the potential to be the first and preferred security architecture. And then after that, after protecting what is most valuable and dear for organizations, to secure business continuity, then after that, then of course there are still things that is good things to do, as we know from the past. We can just not completely rely on that. I can take another one. Can you really implement a full Zero Trust architecture solution, or can you only implement it partly? And for what organizations? I assume it's about the sizes. What size of organization does it apply to? Yes, you can absolutely implement, and that is what we have done. And the security or the Zero Trust architecture based on the NIST, a special publication going through the 3 approaches, the 7 basic tenets, the key definitions to improve its strength, optimize it for how good it is, and do that end to end. You need to go through these steps of how you implementing each of the different parts and the integrations you probably need to do, that you cannot do that with a single product. You need to combine several good things, and also in combination with good practices like procedures that needs to be changed towards the Zero Trust principle. Yes. Anything more? I would say that is probably here. I can also see a time check. We are top of the hour. I'm sure that we can share other questions and answers after the event. So with that, first to you, Paula, thank you very much. It was delighted to have you here and see these examples and pull from all the experience and wisdom you have.
Thank you so much for the invitation as well, and I also agree with your zero trust comments. So as a part of zero trust, we also think the future for passwordless and also the privilege access, and that's something that nowadays it's absolutely regarding the assuming the breach approach. So yeah, that is the direction that we also see, not from just words perspective, but from the pen tester's perspective. So thank you for listening as well, and wishing to everybody a great day.
Thank you very much, and take care. Have a nice day and stay safe.